Hello, Nation of Immigrants. We are back. It's been a while. I've been a little busy. The pandemic, really got me out of the routine of and the habit of doing this podcast. But it is something that I feel is an important podcast, and I'm happy to be back at it. And this isn't just a one-off episode just because the election's tomorrow, although that is kind of part of what spurred this. But we've been talking here at the firm about ways to improve on Nation of Immigrants and things that we can add to this program. So you will be hearing more from my partners and potentially other immigration practitioners as well. But today I'm going to be talking about the Trump immigration plan for his second term versus the Biden immigration plan, and talking about some of the issues that come up in each of those plans, and also encourage you to go out and vote for the policy priorities that you prefer. I think if you've followed this podcast at all, you kind of already know who I'm going to vote for, especially in this issue. Go Biden. But yeah, when it comes to the immigration issues, there's really no real choice here. Biden is the better candidate on immigration. So without further ado, let's get to our intro and then jump into these different policies.
You're listening to Nation of Immigrants.
America is a nation of immigrants.
A podcast about U.S. immigration law with your host, Jacob Tingen.
Okay, so as I mentioned, we're going to be talking about the Trump versus Biden immigration plan. And what's interesting, first of all, the Trump plan, there's no, on his official campaign website, there's no this is what I plan to do. There is a promises kept link, and it has some information about immigration and I guess things that he claims to have done. If you dig into a lot of the news reporting and just the reality, there's been virtually no new wall, maybe 100 miles, maybe. And I think that's even optimistic. But again, I've never been a fan of the wall, so that's good news for me. But for their side to say, hey, we've done all this stuff at the border, and we built all this new wall, that's just not accurate. So do some research, you'll see that that's what's going on. Where I did get a glimpse into the Trump admin immigration policy moving forward into this kind of next set is a news article where Stephen Miller, who is undoubtedly the architect of many of the Trump admin policies towards immigration over the last 4 years. If you've followed along, you know that he's the guy really that's kind of driving this forward. And he has laid out kind of an immigration agenda, and we'll look at that. On the Biden website, they have a tab for immigration, and Biden's plan is titled, "The Biden Plan for Securing Our Values as a Nation of Immigrants." Nice touch there on the title. And so it kind of emphasizes, frankly, on doing a lot of, at first I was disappointed when I started to read it because I'm like, well, that's vague. But then it just goes on and on forever. And so many of these things I like. We will not get into them all. Unfortunately, one of the things that I'd like to see is a cohesive effort to get Congress to do something. I'd like to see Congress's plan on immigration more than Biden's plan or Trump's plan, but this is what we got. So let me address a couple things in the Trump plan first, and then we'll discuss the Biden plan second, and see where this all takes us. So, so Stephen Miller made some comments about what he views as the immigration policy moving forward. Plans to keep an immigration freeze on green cards and visas. Plans to keep asylum down. This is one of those things that just drives me crazy. As someone who works with refugees and people who are applying for asylum, I know that the fear that these people experience is real. So to kick these people while they're down, even though we're not in the midst of the harsh family separation policies of a couple years back, these are still people who are fleeing for their lives here, right? Right? And if they're with their family or not, they're still fleeing for their lives. It's hard to adjust to a new country. It's hard to make things work. And when we do our level best to keep asylum approval rates down, or to prevent people from getting access to our asylum system. I just can't support that. And if you consider yourself to be pro-life, then be pro-human refugee life, because these people are seriously in need of our help. Punish and outlaw sanctuary cities, cracking down aggressively in sanctuary cities. So that's another aspect of their agenda moving forward, of the Trump agenda moving forward, if he does manage to get reelected. I teach a lecture on an annual basis that a professor at a local college asked me to come in, and I talk about sanctuary cities. And what's interesting is that this is a term that is thrown about in political discourse. And in reality, what we talk about in that lecture, that class that I give, is that if you really understood what a sanctuary city is, most of you would agree with me that it's ridiculous to withhold funding from sanctuary cities, to punish these cities, because they're really just trying to comply with the Constitution. There are a number of laws that have led to liability for jurisdictions, and that's, even if you are just trying to tell the federal government, hey, look, I'm not going to cooperate on these things because it could lead to legal liability, and my county and our constituents end up paying, for us violating the Constitution. So we're not going to do that. That can get you labeled as a sanctuary city. Of course, other jurisdictions take it farther, right? And you've heard of jurisdictions who just absolutely aren't cooperating, and I get that. But there are jurisdictions that are saying, hey, look, we will cooperate, but courts have said that this is unconstitutional, so we're just not going to do it. Even those jurisdictions are sometimes being labeled as sanctuary cities. And to risk federal funding for saying, hey, look, we're going to comply with the Constitution, but not your rules. So we could talk about that later. I think we actually did kind of cover sanctuary cities and that definition in one of the prior episodes. Stephen Miller, the Trump admin, wants to expand the travel ban and screenings. What I think is fascinating is that one of the things he wants to do in the interviews is he wants to go further by vetting the ideological sympathies or leanings of visa applicants to gauge their potential for recruitment by radicals. I understand that that's just a justification to keep out potential liberals. That's what I hear, right? Like he's adding a test to make sure that people who are only sympathetic to his political ideas get through. So there's that. Also wants to keep cutting down on work visas, even though, even before the pandemic, we were in a need for nurses and doctors. And, I'm sure maybe they'll have some kind of exception to that. But I'm not under the impression that Stephen Miller cares to admit more immigrants of any kind. But the points-based entry system, we've talked about these kinds of things in the past. That's what they want to move towards. I like the idea of the American dream. I'm fine to bring in the wealthy and those who are able to work, and I think we should continue to do that, even though Stephen Miller doesn't. But I also feel that we should allow in people who are coming for their lives, for their very lives, to save themselves, and to let them make of this country the best that they can and make the best of themselves. We owe a lot to immigrants in our nation, and we are a nation of immigrants. The Biden, in this news article, the Biden campaign responded and said that many of the policies outlined by Stephen Miller are xenophobic and racist. And I know that's, seems harsh and pretty intense language to use about an immigration plan. But when you're as close to it as I am, that's the way I see it too. So let's go over to the Biden plan. Basically, it tends to want to undo a bunch of things that the Trump administration did. Fortunately, a lot of things were blocked or just never happened, like the border wall. It just never was built, so it's not like you got to tear it down. But there are a number of issues, particularly in the area of asylum, that I want to see undone. I feel like a lot of the Trump policies on asylum have been terrifying and bad. Like the family separation at the border was an attempt to dissuade people from coming to our border and applying for asylum. We've already covered that in depth. We know that these people are fleeing for their lives. We just know it. But you may not be aware of, even though we've talked about it, these tent cities in Mexico, the Remain in Mexico program, the migrant protection protocols. And so people would come up to the border and say, hey, I'd like to apply for asylum. And they said, great, wait in line in Mexico. And then, of course, we know that they haven't been given due process. They haven't been given legitimate hearings. There's been lots of news coverage on that issue. And basically, these people who are already in vulnerable populations end up living in these tent cities just on the other side of the U.S.-Mexico border in Mexico. And we know that these people are being taken advantage of, that girls are being violated, that all sorts of terrible things are happening with cartels, and we're just letting it happen. That's got to end. So I am a big fan of the humanitarian aspects of the Biden plan in terms of immigration. One of the things we've talked about a lot is the public charge rule imposed by the Trump admin. So Biden has said, look, we're gonna reverse that. I think that's a good call. Then it mentions protecting DACA and those kinds of things. I'm okay with most of this plan. The thing that bothers me most about immigration policy in the U.S. is that so much is dependent on who's president. The executive branch has so much power over immigration. At this point, it's not even just about enforcing the laws, it's making the rules up as you go along. So one of the things that I would like to see as a priority is that Congress takes a lot more immigration power back and says, look, the president can do these things. Because one presidential administration to the other, they're just using too much muscle and shifting the goalposts of what a good asylum case is, what a good asylum policy is, and it just leads to not much getting done. For those of you who are the law and order types, you will be happy to know that under the Obama administration, they actually deported a lot more people, and they actually deported people who had criminal histories a lot more frequently as well. Whereas with the Trump policy of we're going to deport everybody, nobody's a priority, and so a lot fewer people ended up being deported. And frankly, if you are concerned about immigrants who commit crimes, even though we've covered this before, immigrants commit crimes at a much lower rate than U.S. citizens. But if that's your worry, then you want the Biden-Obama era policies again, and that's kind of what Biden is saying. He's saying, look, we'll return to what we were doing, we'll reprioritize what we were doing, and then we've got a long laundry list of things that we're going to be working on. I'd like to believe this. I'd like to see it happen, but I know that it can't happen just with a president. It has to happen with a Congress too. So these are the choices you have as you go into the voting booth tomorrow, at least on the issue of immigration. I know that there are a lot of other issues and a lot of other concerns that people have. I know that COVID is a big concern. So as you think about issues that are important to you, consider the human cost of the last 4 years of immigration policies, of separating families, and of taking steps to prevent people who are fleeing from their lives from coming into our country. And consider the cost in terms of human life, in terms of trauma and suffering. It seems to me to be an easy choice. So that's it for Nation of Immigrants today. We will be back. Like I said, we've been talking about it here in the office. We've got some things coming, and I'm excited to continue to talk about immigration in the coming months and years. Thanks.
Thank you for listening to Nation of Immigrants.
America is a nation of immigrants.
Subscribe to the podcast on iTunes. Watch the live stream on YouTube and Facebook, or visit jacobtingen.com to learn more.